talking about a hazard that literally outlasts civilization. I mean, imagine trying to leave a message for someone 10,000 years from now, and that message isn't, hello, it's danger, don't dig here, it will kill you. Pretty intense stuff.
It really is, and that gets right to the heart of it, this concept scientists call deep time. The really nasty high-level waste. It stays dangerous for tens, sometimes hundreds of thousands of years.
Hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, that time frame just dwarfs human history, right?
Exactly.
Our languages change, empires rise and fall multiple times over. It's a completely unprecedented challenge for us as a species.
When I first started looking into this, I kind of assumed it was mostly an engineering problem.
Yep.
Just build a better container, find a deep hole somewhere. Simple.
Right, that's the common thought.
But the sources we looked at suggest it's much more than that. What makes it this massive multi-generational crisis if it's not just about the engineering?
Well, that's the fascinating paradox here. We actually do have pretty solid technical solutions for the most part. The engineering exists. The real sticking points, they're human.
Human factors, like what?
Things like political will, just getting governments to agree and stick to a plan over decades, let alone centuries. Then there's institutional reliability. Can the organizations we create today actually be trusted to manage this stuff safely for millennia? And like you said, how do we even communicate the danger across such vast timescales?
Oh, okay. So it's our own limitations turning a solvable technical issue into this huge, expensive, ongoing problem.
Exactly. It's a multi-billion-dollar headache precisely because of those human elements.
That really is the core paradox, isn't it? We figured out how to split the atom, this incredible power, but we're still scratching our heads about cleaning up the leftovers responsibly.
Yeah.
So buckle up, because today we're diving into some genuinely alarming realities, some ideas that were so out there they sound completely absurd but were actually considered, and some pretty astounding facts about nuclear waste.
Okay, let's start with some of the more creative ideas, the ones that sound like pure sci-fi, like just launching the waste into space, get it off the planet entirely.
Right.
I was honestly amazed to read that back in 1974, NASA actually looked at this and said, yeah, feasible.
Feasible, yes. That early report saw the appeal. Just get rid of it. Permanently gone from Earth. But when you look closer, especially with modern analysis, it falls apart pretty quickly.
No, so the cost.
The cost is just staggering. You're looking at something like $20,000 per kilogram just to get stuff into orbit.
Yeah.
Now imagine launching the, 270,000 tons of spent fuel we already have. It's just financially impossible for any country. Okay, so ridiculously expensive. But beyond the money, what's the alarming part? Because there has to be one, right?
Oh, absolutely. The risk. Think about launch failures. We know they happen, right? Challenger Columbia. A rocket carrying nuclear waste blows up on launch or fails to reach orbit. You could scatter highly radioactive material across a massive area.
This is a Socratic, like the Chernobyl level event.
Functionally, yes.
Yeah.
The potential contamination could be on that scale. So you're trying to solve a problem, but the solution itself carries this catastrophic risk. It just doesn't make sense from a safety perspective.
No, definitely not. So space is a non-starter. What other sort of grand ideas were floated?
Well, another one was using subduction zones, where tectonic plates meet and one slides under the other.
Yeah.
The idea was basically stick the waste containers onto a plate that's going down into the Earth's mantle. Over millions of years, it gets pulled deep inside the planet. Problem solved permanently.
Millions of years. That sounds like predicting geology on a timescale that's, let's say, absurdly ambitious.
Exactly. That's the word for it. The alarming bit is the sheer geological uncertainty. What if the heat from the waste itself makes it move around down there? What if it comes back up through volcanoes millions of years later? We just don't know.
And could drilling into those zones cause problems?
That's another huge concern. Could it actually trigger earthquakes? It's a possibility. Plus, even if it worked perfectly, you'd likely be putting it in the ocean floor to start with, and international treaties flat out ban dumping nuclear waste at sea. So, ambitious idea, but geologically dicey and politically impossible.
Okay, so no going up, no going way, way down. What about changing the waste itself? I read about transmutation. That sounds pretty astounding, almost like modern alchemy.
It does have that kind of futuristic appeal, yeah. The idea is to bombard the long-lived radioactive isotopes with neutrons, usually in a special kind of reactor, to change them into isotopes that decay much faster. So you reduce how long the stuff stays dangerous, and you can shrink the volume, too.
That sounds really good. Why aren't we just doing that everywhere?
Well, the alarming catch, as always, is that it's not a magic bullet. First, it's incredibly complex technology, very expensive, and requires building whole new types of nuclear facilities. But the biggest issue, it almost always involves reprocessing the spent fuel
Wait,
first.
processing, that's where you separate out the plutonium and uranium, right?
Exactly. And separating plutonium makes it much more accessible. That raises huge nuclear proliferation concerns. Suddenly, the material needed for nuclear weapons or even just dirty bombs is easier to get hold of.
Ah, so it solves one problem, the longevity, but creates another massive one, security risks.
Precisely. It shifts the problem rather than eliminating it. You still need long-term storage for some waste products, and now you have this added security nightmare.
Wow. Okay, so these big sci-fi solutions have major flaws, but sometimes the failures aren't grand or high-tech. Sometimes they're just mundane. Which brings us to something truly alarming and absurd, the cat litter catastrophe.
Ah, yes, the WIPP incident. The Waste Isolation Pilot Plant in New Mexico, 2014. This is just a perfect, albeit terrifying example of human failure. And the proximate cause is almost unbelievable.
Go on.
A radiation leak happened because one waste drum, just one, was packed using the wrong material. Instead of the required inorganic clay absorbent, someone used organic wheat-based cat litter, like Sweet Scoop brand specifically.
Wait, cat litter, you're kidding.
Not kidding. And this organic litter reacted chemically with the nitrate salts also in the waste drum. It created heat, gases, basically turned the drum into a pressure cooker until the lid popped. Released radioactive material into the underground facility.
That is profoundly absurd. How does something like that even happen in a high-security nuclear waste facility?
That's the alarming part. It wasn't just a one-off slip-up by one person. The investigations pointed to a deeper issue, an eroding safety culture at Los Alamos National Laboratory, where the drum was packed.
Eroding safety culture, what drove that?
According to the reports, things like overambitious political initiatives, budget pressures, schedule pressures, the usual suspects in organizational failures. It led to poor management, ineffective maintenance, lack of proper oversight. Staff weren't trained properly, procedures weren't followed, corners were cut. The cat litter was just the final absurd trigger.
And the fallout. I mean, beyond the radioactive kind.
Pretty bad. There was a significant delay, like 10 hours in the emergency response detecting the release properly. The underground ventilation system's filters were bypassed for a time. 22 workers ended up with internal radiation exposure. And the cleanup costs, over $1 billion, all traced back ultimately to a bag of the wrong kitty litter and systemic failures.
$1 billion. That's just astounding. It really shows how even tiny errors, amplified by weak safety culture, can have enormous consequences in this field.
Exactly. And the danger isn't just inside these big facilities. There's the whole issue of orphan sources. Radioactive materials just lost or abandoned out in the world.
Like the Goiânia accident in Brazil, that story is chilling.
Deeply chilling and both alarming and astounding in its own way. 1987. A highly radioactive cesium-137 source from an old, abandoned cancer therapy machine was just left behind. Some guy scavenging for scrap metal found it, thought the heavy casing might be valuable.
And they broke it open.
They did. Inside, they found this powder that glowed blue in the dark. Cesium-137 chloride salt, they were fascinated by it, took it home.
Oh, no.
Yeah. They shared it with family, friends, people touched it. A little girl even rubbed it on her skin like glitter because it was so pretty. For nearly a week, this stuff circulated before anyone realized what it was.
What happened to them?
4 people died directly from the radiation exposure, including that 6-year-old girl. Hundreds, about 249 people were contaminated. It became one of the worst radiological incidents ever caused by a single forgotten source and human curiosity.
That's horrifying. And it's not the only example, is it? Our sources mention others.
Sadly, no. There was the case in Georgia where some woodcutters found a similar type of device, a radioisotope thermoelectric generator, basically a nuclear battery abandoned in the forest. It used strontium-90. It was warm, so they dragged it back to their camp to use as a heat source.
As a heater.
Yep. Several got severe radiation burns. One eventually died. Then there was a lost cesium source in Azerbaijan someone carried around in their pocket for weeks. 5 people died from that exposure. People scavenging scrap metal from old Soviet nuclear-powered lighthouses, completely unaware of the powerful strontium sources inside.
Just highlights this vulnerability, doesn't it? It's not just about reactors and huge waste sites.
Exactly. The sources say it really comes down to the micromanagement and security of every gram of radioactive material in existence. Every hospital, every industrial site, every old piece of equipment, it all needs tracking and securing forever. It's an astounding logistical and security challenge.
And of course, we can't ignore the big disasters, though maybe just briefly. Chernobyl, Kishthems. These are alarming on a whole different scale.
Absolutely. Chernobyl INES level 7, the worst possible rating. The official immediate death toll was relatively low, but the long-term estimates from radiation-induced cancers vary wildly, from thousands to even hundreds of thousands. The true cost is still debated. Kishtim in the USSR back in '57 was a level 6. A waste tank exploded. Massive contamination. But because of Soviet secrecy, locals weren't evacuated for over a week. Again, death toll estimates are all over the place, maybe 50, maybe thousands.
The secrecy and the disputed numbers themselves are alarming. It makes it hard to fully grasp the human cost.
It does. It highlights the difficulty of getting clear information, especially long-term, around these events.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. There's this enduring paradox about the waste itself. We hear constantly about the massive nuclear waste problem, but one source called it a T-Rex in a teacup. There's an astounding image. What does it mean?
It's about the proportions, really. The stuff everyone worries most about, the high-level waste, or HLW, the really intensely radioactive material from spent fuel. It's actually less than 1% of the total volume of all nuclear waste generated.
Less than 1%.
Yep. But that tiny volume contains over 95% of the total radioactivity. On the flip side, you have low-level waste, or LLW, things like contaminated tools, clothing, filters, that makes up something like 94% of the volume, but only contains about 1% of the radioactivity.
Wow. So the huge problem isn't really about a vast quantity of waste, like a giant landfill.
Not for the high-level stuff, no. It's a relatively small volume, physically speaking, but it's incredibly potent and lasts for those incredibly long timescales. So the challenge isn't managing mountains of material, it's safely isolating a small, extremely hazardous amount for millennia.
That's actually kind of astounding. It reframes the problem, doesn't it? It suggests that deep geological disposal, putting that small volume deep underground, should be technically feasible.
Exactly. The relatively small volume makes deep geological repositories a very sound technical approach, which leads us right into another big paradox, the alarming reality of our current solution.
The permanent temporary solution, right?
That's the one. Right now, most spent nuclear fuel is stored on-site at power plants, usually in steel-lined concrete pools initially, and then transferred to massive concrete and steel containers called dry casks.
And these casks are safe.
Oh yeah, technically they're incredibly robust. Our sources say they're designed to withstand things like airplane crashes and missile impacts. The U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission itself says waste can be safely stored like this on-site for at least the next century. That's an astounding level of engineering safety.
Okay, so if it's so safe, what's the problem?
The alarming paradox is that this very safety reduces the political pressure to actually implement a permanent solution, like a deep geological repository. Because the immediate risk is low, politicians and the public aren't urgently demanding action.
So temporary storage just stretches on indefinitely.
That's what's happening. It becomes the de facto permanent solution, even though it was never intended to be. And this relies on utilities maintaining security and monitoring these sites for potentially centuries. It's a huge, unfunded, long-term liability.
And speaking of unfunded, the financial side of this inaction is pretty alarming too, isn't it?
It's absurd, frankly. In the U.S., the government was legally obligated to start taking spent fuel by 1998 for permanent disposal. They haven't. So utilities have sued, and the government has already paid out billions with a B in damages.
Billions paid for not doing something.
Yes, and future liabilities are estimated in the tens of billions more. There's actually a dedicated federal fund paid into by the utilities with billions sitting there specifically for a repository. But because of the political deadlock, primarily oversighting a location like Yucca Mountain, the money can't be used effectively. Inaction is costing taxpayers billions.
That's just, wow, a massive failure of political will with a staggering price tag. And it raises that ethical question, too. Are we just dumping this problem on future generations because it's politically inconvenient now?
That's exactly the question. It's a clear example of short-term political thinking creating long-term risks and costs.
Now, what about reprocessing? We touched on the proliferation risk, but the promise sounds astounding. reduce waste volume, and recover enough energy to power the whole U.S. for 150 years.
That potential is real, theoretically. France, the UK, Japan, Russia, they all do reprocessing to some extent. But the downsides are significant beyond just the plutonium risk we mentioned.
Like what?
Our sources describe it as very expensive, messy, and unsecure. The facilities are costly to build and operate. They generate their own streams of secondary waste. And the environmental track record hasn't always been great. And again, that proliferation risk is the big one, especially for the U.S. The official U.S. policy has generally been against large-scale reprocessing, partly out of fear it would encourage other countries to do the same, potentially putting weapons-usable material into more hands globally.
So it's another trade-off. Potential benefits, but serious security and cost concerns. Which brings us back to the consensus solution. Deep geological repositories, or DGRs. If the science says they're the way to go, why don't we have them everywhere?
Ugh. The siting quagmire. This is probably the single biggest obstacle, and it's almost entirely political and social, not technical. The international scientific community agrees. Burying the waste deep in stable geological formations is the safest long-term option.
But nobody wants it in their backyard.
Exactly. The NMBY phenomenon, not in my backyard. As soon as a potential site is identified, local opposition ramps up, often fueled by fear, mistrust of government, or concerns about property values. Look at Yucca Mountain in Nevada. Decades of study, billions spent, deemed technically suitable by many scientists. But intense political opposition, especially from Nevada, has stalled it indefinitely.
So even with a scientific consensus, public and political opposition can just shut it down. That's an alarming failure of the political process to deliver on a critical national need.
It absolutely is. And while we're stuck in this political gridlock, the security threats evolve. Having waste stored at dozens of separate power plant sites instead of one or two highly secured repositories creates more potential targets.
Targets for theft, like for a dirty bomb.
Well, that's one concern, or sabotage. But now we have even newer, truly astounding and alarming threats. Think cyber warfare. Remember the Stuxnet worm? It physically damaged Iranian centrifuges through a cyber attack. Could nuclear waste facilities be vulnerable?
That's a chilling thought.
And then there's the reality we're seeing play out right now. A major nuclear power plant, Zaporizhia in Ukraine, located inside an active war zone, subject to shelling, military occupation. These are risks nobody seriously planned for decades ago. It adds a whole new, terrifying dimension to nuclear safety and security.
Okay, before we get to the really far-out stuff, let's quickly bust a couple of myths. Because some public fears seem almost absurd compared to the data, like transporting waste people, picture trucks leaking radiation everywhere.
Right, the fear is huge. But get this, globally, something like 15 million packages of radioactive material, not just high-level waste, but medical isotopes, industrial sources, etc., are transported every single year. And the safety record. According to international agencies, there have been no releases from these transport packages that caused significant harm to people or the environment.
15 million packages a year, basically without incident. That's astounding. Why is the public perception so different?
It's likely a communication failure, partly, and maybe just the innate fear of radiation. It taps into something primal. Same with the plutonium myth, the most dangerous substance on Earth.
Yeah, you hear that all the time. It's not true.
Well, it's dangerous, absolutely. It's radioactive, carcinogenic if inhaled, but most dangerous, no. Gram for gram, things like botulinum toxin, Botox, ricin, even certain snake venoms are far more acutely toxic. Even caffeine, technically, is more toxic in the short term if you could ingest enough.
Caffeine, okay, that's absurd, but it makes the point.
It does. Plutonium's danger is primarily long-term cancer risk from inhalation. Many other toxins kill you much faster. But most dangerous substance makes for a better soundbite, right? It shows the gap between scientific reality and public perception.
Which brings us perfectly to the ultimate communication challenge.
Yeah.
Maybe the most astounding problem of all. How on earth do you warn people 10,000 years from now? 100,000 years.
Exactly. Languages will be unrecognizable. Cultures, symbols, our entire understanding of science might be completely different. How do you convey danger? deadly invisible stuff buried here.
Wow.
To people who might not even have a concept of radiation. It's silent, invisible, the effects are delayed.
It's mind-bending. So what are some of the ideas? I read about hostile architecture. That sounds intense.
It is. These are concepts developed by expert panels trying to
wow.
think outside the box. The idea is to make the repository site itself physically communicate danger non-verbally.
Yeah.
So you have things like the landscape of Thorns. Imagine a vast field filled with huge, sharp, irregularly sized spikes sticking out of the ground, maybe 50 feet high, made of rock or concrete. Something that just screams, "Keep out, this place is dangerous," on a primal level.
Wow. Okay, what else?
Menacing earthworks, shaping the land itself into huge, unsettling patterns, jagged shapes, maybe like giant lightning bolts dug into the ground that look unnatural and threatening, especially from afar or from the air. Or forbidding blocks. Scatter enormous house-sized blocks of black, oppressive-looking concrete across the site in a chaotic grid, making the land completely useless for farming or building.
So the goal isn't just a warning sign. It's to make the place feel inherently wrong, repulsive.
Exactly. Make it look like not a place of honor, not a monument, but a place of dread. Using landscape and architecture to tap into deep-seated human responses to danger and taboo, it acknowledges that written language might fail.
This stuff is wild.
Yeah.
But then there's the idea that's maybe the most astounding and borderline absurd,
Yeah.
the atomic priesthood.
Yes. This came out of the same expert panels wrestling with deep time communication. It's a form of social engineering, really. The idea is, what if written records and physical markers still fail or get misinterpreted? Maybe we need a human institution.
A priesthood.
Yeah.
Like religious.
Not necessarily religious in the traditional sense, but using the mechanisms of enduring human institutions, like religions. Imagine a self-perpetuating group, carefully selected, whose sole mission is to preserve and pass down the knowledge of the waste site's location and danger across millennia.
How would they do that?
Through ritual, allegory, myth, superstition. They might create legends or false trails for outsiders, stories about cursed land or sleeping monsters, while preserving the true technical information within the initiated group. It recognizes that stories and rituals can sometimes outlast empires and scientific paradigms.
That is quite something. Creating myths on purpose to protect the future. It feels both brilliant and deeply weird.
It's definitely unconventional. It acknowledges the limits of purely rational communication over deep time and tries to leverage the power of human culture itself. It's often discussed alongside tiered messaging like WIPP plans, having multiple layers of warnings, from simple symbols to complex technical data, hoping something survives and is understood.
And then there are the ideas that just sound completely out there, like genetically engineered warning cats.
Slight chuckle.
Okay.
Yeah, that one gets a lot of attention. It was a serious proposal, though highly speculative. The idea, floated by a linguist and a philosopher, was, what if you could genetically engineer an animal, like a cat or a dog, that changes color dramatically when it detects radiation?
A living Geiger counter cat.
Basically. The thinking was, if such animals became common companions and people knew Fluffy turns bright orange near the bad place, that knowledge might persist culturally, passed down through animal husbandry and folklore, even if the original scientific reason is lost.
Or plants that carry a warning in their DNA.
Same kind of speculative bioengineering concept. Maybe flowers that only bloom in a specific unnatural color over the waste site. These are obviously extreme long shots, maybe even absurd, but they show how hard people are thinking about this unprecedented communication problem. They're exploring every avenue, from concrete spikes to glowing cats.
So, wrapping this all up after our deep dive, from absurd cat litter mistakes to astounding communication challenges, that core paradox really stands out, doesn't it?
It really does. We have the technical capacity, the engineering solutions for managing nuclear waste relatively safely. Deep geological repositories are viable. But the human side, the long-term political commitment, the institutional stability, the public acceptance, the communication across ages, that's where we falter. That's the bottleneck.
But this is not impossible, right?
Right.
You mentioned Finland and Sweden.
Exactly. They're the success stories, relatively speaking. They used a consent-based approach. They worked with local communities for years, building trust, offering benefits, ensuring transparency. And now, Finland's Onkalo repository is basically built. Sweden's is well underway. It proves it can be done. It's fundamentally a political and social problem, and it is solvable if approached correctly.
So this whole deep dive, it really shows that nuclear waste isn't just about physics or geology. It's a mirror reflecting our own societal strengths and weaknesses, isn't it? our ingenuity, but also our short-sightedness, our political paralysis.
It's a profound test, really, a test of our ability to act responsibly, not just for ourselves, but for countless generations we'll never know.
What does it ultimately say about us? That we can harness the power of the atom, but we struggle so much just to agree on where to put the leftovers safely for the deep future. It's a question worth pondering. And maybe ask yourself, what other truly long-term challenges are we, as a species, kind of unconsciously pushing off, deferring to an unimaginable future because they're too hard to deal with today?